Good evening, everybody. My name is Vasco, and I'm here to talk to you about stuff you probably don't believe. So go easy on me, right? We can then hash it out during the break. But before we start, I wanted to ask you a question. And because we're in Estonia, we know that you guys are much more outgoing and collaborative than the Finns on the other side of the Gulf, right? I hope so, because I live there. Probably no one would care to venture an answer to the question that I have, which is, why do we estimate? So in your experience, from your own knowledge, why do we estimate? And now I'm talking, of course, about estimating the duration of projects. How long will it take to deliver something? Who would like to take the first stab? All right, there in the back.
For resource planning.
For resource planning. Very good. Why else do we estimate?
To have gut feeling about the costs.
To know the costs.
Estimate pushes to design together.
Yeah, but why do we estimate?
Again, so estimate is just the outcome of good design. So I see this.
So you mean to design?
To design.
Yeah.
To know the date.
Yeah, just a second, don't forget that.
Have someone to blame.
To have someone to blame.
Real one.
And you said to know the date.
Yeah, to get the time frame.
We have space for two more. Yeah?
Because the ones who are paying for the project are demanding this answer.
What answer?
When the project will be done.
Okay, but that's already there.
Okay.
To split.
But if the answer is because I'm told to, I can write that. Is that?
Yeah, pretty much. Yes.
All right. Because I am told to.
To split to smaller pieces. Too big.
There was one there.
Okay.
Just a second. There was somebody there. No? Okay, so then that is the last one that goes up. To split. Split what?
To smaller pieces.
To split the project into smaller pieces. All right. Okay, so we have here a few reasons why people estimate in this room. There are many more reasons than these ones, but these are all good ones. For resource planning, to know the costs, to be able to design, to have someone to blame. Very good reason indeed. This works very well if you have a vendor-buyer relationship, by the way. The courts also like this, gives them work. Lawyers also, they like that as well. To get the time frame, because I'm told to, that's an obvious answer, of course, and to split the project into smaller pieces. So I guess from the title, you already see, okay, the red dot doesn't work. From the title, you already see that some of these questions can be answered better without estimates. So the title already suggests that if you want to do resource planning, to know the costs, to get the time frame, there's better ways to do it than to estimate. We can also discuss whether the others are related to estimate or whether they even require estimates or not. Of course, having someone to blame is made much easier if somebody signed a time frame. But you really don't need to estimate. And if you haven't known about it yet, I'm writing a book. It's at noestimatesbook.com, and I actually tell a story of how you can get to that outcome, to be able to blame someone without actually having to estimate. Anyway, you can find me in these locations, but I must warn you that what we are going into right now is not, even though it's funny, it's not really playful. There's a lot more going on behind the hashtag no estimates than the estimate word would give you to understand. Oops, there we go. Here's a tweet by a friend, Paul Klipp. How many of you use Scrum, by the way? Okay, keep the hands up, keep the hands up. How many of you use backlogs? So there's more people using backlogs than using Scrum. This is a good sign, though. It means people are kind of experimenting, maybe going on the wild side. Paul says in his tweet, most backlogs are waste. Does someone disagree with that? Okay, so why do you think that no backlogs are waste, or at least only a small minority?
I think I don't agree that no backlogs are waste. But
Okay.
I agree that backlogs can contain some useful stuff.
So backlogs can contain some useful stuff. It's also true from project plans. Project plans can contain some useful stuff, yet we drop those and started using Scrum. And do note that he doesn't say that there's nothing useful in backlogs. He says that they are waste. What he means is that, and you probably have felt that in your own experience, when you're working through a project, you know, delivering a product, a new version of an existing product, or even a new product, a lot of stuff that comes up, a lot of ideas are wasteful. So for example, the director of finance might come to your desk and say, hey, we need this new report, and actually we need it by tomorrow. But then tomorrow the CEO comes to your desk and says, forget that report, there's this customer case, now we need to focus on that customer case. 3 months later, the CFO does not come to your desk because he actually didn't need that report. In the meanwhile, it's already in the backlog. By the way, it will never get out of the backlog. It will stay there forever because the director of finance would not be very happy if you would take it away. This leads many teams to actually have two backlogs, the real one and the one they show the stakeholders. And that's a form of waste. But by the way, because the one they show the stakeholders is still looked at, they still have to estimate it, right? They still have to have the release planning for that backlog, even though they're not going to use it, but they have to have the release planning for it. That means they have to estimate every single item in that backlog. Otherwise, how could they answer questions such as, how do we plan our resources? How do we know the costs? Who do I blame? Right? But this is happening every day. Not perhaps in your company, but in most companies out there. It is happening. So Paul says estimating backlog items is therefore super waste because it's waste on top of waste. Now, just to give you an idea, the majority of the backlogs are done in a iceberg mode. If you remember the book by Mike Cohn, Agile Estimation and Planning, he actually uses that metaphor and he says, you know, the top of the backlog should be very finely groomed stories, so stuff you understand very well, and then the bottom of the backlog you could have like epics and so on, so larger pieces of work, right? So even this metaphor already tells you there's two backlogs. There's the one you use, the one is useful for you on a regular basis, to have discussions with product owners, to agree in the team what you should do next. And then there's the other part of the backlog, which, as Mike Cohn suggests, is also the larger part of the backlog, which is very low in priority, very fuzzy items, you know, a request from the director of finance that never came up again, and so on. But yet we need to estimate. It gets even better. I once had this question. You probably don't believe that anymore because, I mean, it is 2015. But I got this question, which is, do you really re-estimate all the items? Oh, yeah, we must. Because, you know, if one item that we thought was a 3 was actually a 5, we must, of course, change the relative estimates. I mean, all of the backlog is affected by that. And then another person was saying, no, we don't do that, because how would you calculate velocity then? Because you could always retrofit the actual duration of the item to fit the estimate. So you would probably have to do some, you know, magic mathematic to have a, what is it called? An equivalent estimate if you have to re-estimate everything. This was an actual discussion that happened in the Agile community. Many people are probably still having this discussion. And that's why revising backlog estimates is in mentally deranged territory. No one gains from that. What does it matter if something that was a 3 has suddenly become a 5? What's a 3, by the way? Do you all agree on what a 3 is? No, you can't, because 3 is a magic number, such as 5 or 8. The Fibonacci sequence was chosen for a reason, because it was not linear. That was at least the rational reason for it. I have another theory. I think it was chosen to confuse managers. Because that way, they think 2 3s are a 6, but there's no 6 in the sequence. So you can go to them and say, you don't really understand this. Let me explain to you how the Fibonacci estimation actually works. So that's super waste for me. So I think this tweet by Paul Kleep basically shows you where we are going with this presentation. And there's a challenge for you. Every now and then, you come to a point in your career and in the development of your knowledge and your practice where you must make a decision. You may choose to wake up tomorrow after this presentation and look at the world just as you look at it today, as if nothing had changed. You can just choose to forget this presentation. It will have no impact in your life. Continue to ignore it, continue to join the many on Twitter that are calling no estimates silly, irresponsible, a bunch of contradictory statements. You can also choose to take the red pill and see how deep the rabbit hole goes. Now, be warned, the only thing I'm promising here is the truth. You will have to live with the consequences of your choice. Not me. I've already taken the red pill. I'm already on the other side. I can already see the matrix. For me, the world is no longer as it used to be.
And the question is, how deep is the hole?
How deep is the hole? May never end.
In your case, if you're already on the dark side, or red side, sorry.
I don't know, Mr. Smith. This quote is there for a purpose. Estimates are poisoning the way we develop software. There's many ways in which they are poisoning the way we develop software. For example, one clearly stated here, because they are a very useful blame tool. It's very easy for me to put the blame on you, get the salary raise, and fire you. And there are actually many people actively using that approach. That's a poisoning behavior that is enabled by estimates. There are other poisoning behaviors, for example, estimate negotiation. Are you really sure that's a 5? Come on, take you out for a beer, it's a 3, isn't it? Or, seriously, you can't deliver this story this sprint? I mean, come on, we have this customer, it's so important, right? I mean, come on, you can work a few more hours, I'll get you pizza. Is this really how we want to live our lives? Is this why we started to develop software? Is this meaningful? Are you going to be proud, you know, many years from now, when you've lived a long and fulfilling life, and you're sitting at the fireplace and you have your grandchild near you and you start telling him the horror stories of those golden age of the wild west of software development. Maybe you don't believe it, but it's still early enough. I mean, we only really started developing software in a massive scale in the 80s. So we're still in the wild west of software development. We're not a profession that is at the level of, say, physicists or mathematicians or maybe even doctors, although I don't like the comparison. So you have your grandchild near you and you're telling them about how we used to develop software in the good old days. And then you're going to tell them a story of a colleague. This happened to me, by the way. This is not a fictitious story. A colleague that, you know, you had fun working with. Is a quiet guy, but, you know, liked a good joke, went for beers with you, had fun, was actually quite productive, was a good coder. And once you come to work and he's not there, and then you ask, so what happened to Tommy? And they tell you, well, Tommy is on a sick leave. Oh, did he get the stomach flu? It's, you know, it's going around. And they'll tell you, actually no. We've started recruiting someone for Tommy's position. Why is that? Did you fire him? No, he's on a sick leave. Well, then he's coming back. And they tell, he's never coming back. Because he had a burnout. His brain was so affected that Tommy couldn't work for the rest of his life. He spent his life in a hospital, potentially later on at home, but with care. Because he had been pushed to the limits. And I don't know about you guys, I've been there. Thankfully, I was able to come back. But estimates are one way we push people to the limits. And estimates are fake. They're not real. Why are we destroying people's lives for the sake of a friggin' number? And this is happening today. I don't know if it's happening to you, but it is happening today. People right now, at this very moment, are receiving angry emails from project managers saying, where the hell's this task? It hasn't been delivered. I approved the overtime. Why isn't it done? This is happening today. Is this the world of software development that we want to build? And I'm not saying that the reason for that is estimates. There are many, many bad reasons for that kind of things to happen. But estimates are enabling that. Estimates are poisoning your future. Not yours necessarily as an individual, but yours as a community. The development community is being affected by the way we look at software development. And estimates are part of that. I'm not taking questions now. Here's a guy that started changing the world of software. People called him crazy. Right now, you probably don't see test-driven development as a very crazy idea. How many of you would, like from 0 to 10, how many of you would give it 5 on the crazy scale? So 10 being totally crazy and 0 being like the most sane and natural idea ever. Test-driven development, is it closer to 10 or closer to 0? So who would give it a 5? No one. Two people, all right. Who would give it a 10? Like total crazy idea, out of left field. No one would take it seriously. Okay, 0. How about people that would give it a 0? It's the most natural way to develop software ever. Okay, there's more of those than the ones that would give it a 5. This is a good sign for this community. Very good. But when Kent started, TDD was a solid 10. Only the crazy people would do it. Right? I mean, think about this. What? You're writing a test before you wrote the code? I don't pay you to write tests, I pay you to write code. Or pair programming. WTF, I'm not going to pay for 2 developers when I can pay for 1. This is stuff this guy was talking about. Was that sane back then? Majority of people didn't think so. That's the truth. This guy changed your world. Maybe you don't look at it that way, but this guy and the people with him that worked on extreme programming literally changed the way software is developed today. Why? Because they were not satisfied with the status quo. And, this is a very important part, they experimented. They did it. They didn't write books before they did it, then they wrote books. They were also not working for a very large consulting company and therefore following all the rules. They were doing stuff on their own. They were bumping their heads against the wall on their own. Here's another guy. He changed the world in a different way. Scrum is today possibly the most used software development method in the world. I'm not sure that is true, but I can guess it is quite close to true. If it's not true now, it will be soon enough. Scrum adoption is growing through the roof. This guy changed your world. It's thanks to guys like this that you don't have requirements reviews that last, I don't know, 2 to 3 hours a piece to review a few hundred requirements. Those were like brain dead experiences. I did some of those. That's how software was developed back then. You write the requirements, then you review it. You get the feedback, right? That's an important part, and that was actually the good part about it. But you don't need that. This guy said, no way, you can bring a story, get it to the sprint, develop it, deliver it, get the feedback, do the next story. Why spend 2 or 3 months writing and reviewing requirements documents? That was a crazy idea back then. Totally crazy idea. But even these guys were not the ones that started the change. Guys like this started the change. Taishi Ono, creator or co-creator of the Toyota production system. How many of you have heard of the Toyota production system before? Okay, quite a few of you. So you probably know that it's the most productive car company in the world. Toyota is the most productive car company in the world. This guy developed that. Thanks to him, books that were written in the 90s started changing many other industries. Today, the ideas that he started developing are now being used in diverse fields such as education, healthcare, and God forbid, software development, right? Lean software development comes from this guy. Of course, he didn't do software, but that's where the ideas came from. But even he got the ideas from somewhere else. This guy's Edward W. Deming. He started studying statistics to help the agricultural production of the United States, ended up being kicked out of the United States because he was not taken seriously, ended up going to Japan, and in the process created the most productive industry in the world. Of course, he didn't do it alone, but he was the guy that started talking about those crazy ideas. He changed your world. It was because of him and others that Taishi Ono started developing the TPS, and it was because of that that we got lean software development, which, at least in my opinion, is an improvement on what we had so far. Crazy people, all of this. All talking about crazy stuff when they started. Some of those things are still considered crazy. I mean, just go to some old school project managers and start talking about pair programming. You'll see how they react. So this is a very important point. Our industry is in its infancy. Software development in a massive scale started in the 80s. That's not a lot. We don't have that much knowledge. We have to push this industry forward. We have to find better ways. And if that means challenging stuff like estimates, I'm all in. Why not? That's how we got this far. How many of you remember what this is? Not even half. When I did software development, if you didn't know how to do this, they wouldn't even consider you for a job. This is a UML diagram, probably from Rational Rows or some such tool, that was then, of course, transformed into code automatically. One would say automagically, right? Then you would just give it to the monkeys. Code monkeys, that is, like people like you. When I did software development, the architects worked with this. The rest, they were monkeys. Little known fact is that today, these days, most developers are actually human beings. But that's how developers were looked at in the 80s, in the 90s, and so on. And then we come to agility. We have such luminaries as Barry Beam, guy that invented the spiral model, a great evolution in terms of process for software development, talking about balancing agility and discipline. I don't know about you guys, but I've tried to write code in TDD, and I sure as hell am sure that it's a lot more disciplined than writing code as a cowboy. Write the test first. No. Don't think about the solution. Write the test first. No, don't try to go to the code file. Write the test first. Then you write the test. And then immediately you go and you write the code. No, first you run the test. But I haven't written any code. Don't worry, trust the process. First run the test code. It's red. Good. Now write the solution. Who the fuck would have thought that was a good idea in the 80s? But that's how TDD is structured. There's a good reason why it's called red-green. The fact there's a red between writing the test and writing the code is a very important piece of information. Here's an example. I was once writing a program, and I was trying to go about writing it in TDD. Obviously, I failed miserably, but I was trying to. And at some point, I write the test. I say red, because you're supposed to say what you expect the test to give you as a result. I say red, I run the test, and it comes out green. And I go like, wait a second, did I already write the solution for this test? I didn't know. That kind of discipline was totally beyond the possibility of what was back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, when Barry Beam was doing project management and developing software approaches. It was impossible, and the reason is simple. Computing cycles were very expensive, so you obviously wouldn't want to spend computing cycles running tests that you knew were going to fail. So you had a lot more assumptions going on. Second, you had a very strict process of software development that followed certain things. And one of the things it said is that the design has already been made. You just need to type the instructions. Right? When I was in school, people said the most important thing is to write the design in paper. Only then you write code. Today, if you're doing TDD, you know that the design is the code and TDD is the design tool. Now, for some of you, this also might seem very weird, but trust me, that's how people look at TDD that have done it for a while. TDD is a design approach. And these guys are telling us that Agile is not disciplined. This is how far the world has come. Your world, the world of software development. Of course, now we know that a lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon. We have PMI launching their Agile certification. How many of you think that will be Agile? But this is happening, right? And the reason is very clear. Scrum Alliance is making buttloads of money with certification. So they want to jump in on the profit. So what is no estimates? It's something that people with these hashtags on Twitter will be interested in immediately. Just like people with those hashtags on Twitter were interested in TDD back then. Because no serious developer would consider TDD in the 80s. Well, 80s was too early. In the 90s, when Beck and company were developing those ideas. Thanks to Smalltalk, which, by the way, is still the godfather of all object-oriented languages. Most of you don't use it or have never used it, but that's how all of those things started. Smalltalk created a lot of technical enablers for what became extreme programming. For me, no estimates is very simple. This is what it's about. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. When you mix design and estimates, you're committing to a plan. When you change that plan, what will happen? People will get mad. At least one project manager will come to you and say, are you crazy? We've already promised to do this. And if you're lucky, there will be lots of design meetings to review all of the estimates. Typically, that's not what will happen. What will happen is that the project manager will say, okay, hide that, I'll approve overtime, let's get this done. And then Tommy gets a burnout. This is what following a plan over responding to change causes. burnouts. And of course, we have the point of value. If you're 100% sure, if you're 100% correct in your estimates, does that mean the customer will be happy with what you delivered? There's no correlation. You might be on time and have an unhappy customer, or you might be late and have a very happy customer. Value and accuracy of estimates are not the same. Unless the only thing you want to do is avoid blame, obviously. And no estimates is darn simple. Here's how I do it. Select the most important piece of work that you need to work on. By the way, this is what the TDD guys would do, but at the code level. I'm doing this at the project level. Select one item, not the next 10 items, one item. Then break that down into risk-neutral chunks of work. What is risk-neutral? It's very simple. If you fail to deliver that, it's not going to bankrupt you. That's what risk-neutral means, right? So of course you will fail. Everybody fails. That's why the responding to change part is so important. But if you do fail, it's not going to be a large negative impact on the project. So break that down into smaller pieces. By the way, you can do that without estimation. I can explain to you in the break how to do that. Develop each piece of work. So start one at a time, develop that, then iterate and refactor. Point 4, which is there because of TDD, which is what this method is inspired by, is also very important, because it is only when you show something to the user of the product, it's only when you get that feedback that you actually know what you're supposed to deliver. The faster you show something, the faster you get the feedback, the more accurate will be your output regarding the expectations of the user or customer. But I do want to say that this is not just how I do it. There's a little bit more behind it. And there's one question I ask, which is the system of development stable? I borrowed that term from statistical process control, another reference to Deming. So this is stuff from the 20s, but now applied to software. What is system of development? How many of you release code that will not go into production or a production-like environment for many weeks? Okay, so if you've now released 50% of the user stories, how far into the project are you? Those that cannot release for many weeks to production. Let's say you've done 50% of all your user stories. How far into the project are you? You have no idea. And that's the only reasonable answer, because the only way to assess progress, wait for it, is to have working software delivered to the people who asked for it. By the way, lest you think I'm crazy, this is what the Agile Manifesto says, right? The only measure of progress is running tested software. You don't have running software if you've only delivered the user stories to the source control. You only have running software and somebody is actually using it in a production-like environment. So of course sometimes you can't necessarily release a new version of the firmware for your Toyota every week. But you could release it to a production-like environment, i.e. an environment that is created to mimic what it would look like to release that software to the wild. And many people already do this. So for example, I didn't work, but friends of mine worked at the radio telecommunications provider, and they actually figured out how to go from a almost a year release cycle into a couple of weeks release cycle. For them, this was a huge impact. And that's your system of development. If you have a 1-year cycle from idea to production-like environment, how do you know if it's stable? The answer is 1 year later. You have to wait a year before that. So it pays off to have shorter feedback cycles. It pays off to have release cycles that are much smaller. So the system of development is from idea to production-like environment. If you can measure the throughput of your system of development, you can then answer this question. Why is that question important? Let's take a story. Here's a manager. He comes to you and he asks you, I'm going to ask you, 10 stories next sprint. I think that's reasonable. Is that unreasonable? Perhaps not. I don't know. What does the system of development look like? This is what it looks like. So, the target, 10 stories, all the way up the top. The last 21 sprints, here, between 1 and 5, mostly between 2 and 4. What would this team do to be able to release 10 stories in the next sprint? Any ideas?
Overtime and pizza.
Overtime and pizza. Not likely to succeed, but you could try it.
Divide it into small stories.
Fake, right? So take a story and say, this is one story. Okay, let's divide this into 5 stories. Okay, if you do that, if you multiply by 5 the stories you have, it's still not sure you are going to deliver 10, but it's a lot more likely, right? Because actually you have some data points on 2 stories delivered per sprint. Other ways. Fake the story points, right? Just like this was about stories, if somebody comes to you and say more story points, we'll just fake it. It's easy. It's just a fake number anyway. Other answers that I've gotten is you extend the sprint until you reach 10. You're laughing, but people have done this. It was not that long ago that in the Scrum community people were discussing the validity of flexible sprints, literally. You go back in the Scrum mailing list and check it out. Flexible sprints is the keyword. A lot of things could be done to try to reach that target, but none of them reasonable. Why? Because the system of development is stable. It doesn't take a genius to understand that the 22nd sprint is likely to deliver between 2 and 5 stories. Could deliver more, but I wouldn't bet my house on it. Right? So why do we estimate? Information is there. If your system of development is stable, you can actually accurately predict how many stories you will deliver over a long period of time, just like this team over 21 sprints. Extremely stable throughput. So the question I'm trying to answer is, can we use the data from the past to predict system throughput in the future? So I created 2 rules. These are the rules I use. I covered this in the No Estimates workshop in more detail, but the basic idea is that if the velocity is outside the limit 3 times in a row, so above or below the lines 3 times in a row, then what I'll say is that I don't know. I don't know what the throughput will be. We'll need to watch. And saying I don't know in some environments might not be a very good career move, but that's the reality. Then there are 5 or more points in sequence, so either 5 going up, 5 going down. You could say, oh, there was just a change in the team. Sven left the team and he was very good, so now the velocity is going down. We need to let it stabilize. Or, John joined the team and he's really good at splitting stories, so now we have more stories. So we have to get to a point where the splitting, that's actually a good thing. We have to get to a point where the splitting is homogeneous before we can tell you what the throughput will be. And I applied these rules to many different projects. I have those on a Google spreadsheet. You can get the link later on. And I applied that to those projects. And I see that all of them fit those rules. So actually, even projects where there have been large oscillations, you can see that you could use the data to predict future throughput. So for me, what is very important to say up front is that if what you want to know is the time frame for something in a way that is reliable, No Estimates delivers. Here's an example, 24 sprints. Which metric is more accurate? I took 2 metrics, story points and stories, so just counting the number of stories. over 24 sprints. The project database is here. Don't worry, you'll get the slides later on. So what happened after 3 sprints? I took the first 3 sprints, I did the average of the story points and the average of the number of stories, and then I looked at the next 23 sprints, right? Because it was a, 21 sprints, because it was a 24 sprint project. The story point predictive power was not that bad. 20%, by the way, overrun is not that bad in the normal project world. So, but 20% being wrong on the wrong side, i.e. if you'd used that metric, you would have been late. Number of stories, 4% on the right side, i.e. if you had used that metric, you would have been early, 4%. How about 5 sprints? One could argue that, 5 sprints you have more data. And indeed, for the story points, you can see the prediction improved from 20 to 13%. By the way, 13% is darn good compared to many estimation methods out there, including the most used ones like Gantt charts, PERT charts, and so on. The number of stories, still 4%. By the way, I double, triple check the numbers. So it's just a coincidence that the numbers are the same. But that's what we got, 4% deviation on the right side, i.e. if you had used that number, you would have been 4% earlier. This is just one project, of course. But the answer to this question, which metric is the most accurate when you want to predict the release date, is number of stories. But there's more. Here's a chart shared by Corey Foy on Twitter. You'll see there's different bars over there. On the left, you have 0 story points bar, the one on the left, and on the right side, you have the 100 story points. I don't know if that's in the Fibonacci sequence, I guess not. So they were kind of fudging the numbers. You have the 100 story points. And you see how the length or the height of the bar, which is between the minimum duration of an item of that category and the maximum duration, changes wildly. So for 0 story points, the minimum duration was close to 0, but the maximum duration was 200 days. For 1 story point, however, the amplitude of the bar is much smaller. Still, between 0 and almost 100 days, 2 was the best. So all your stories should be a 2. Right? That's what you could conclude from this. Don't conclude that, by the way. I'm just making fun of this. Anyway, shortest amplitude on the 2. For the 40 and 100, there were no numbers. 3, 5, then we have 8, 13, and 20. And look at how crazy the 8 bar is. The minimum duration was maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 or so. The maximum duration was almost 290 days. Jesus, would you like to bet your house on that kind of accuracy? I wouldn't. But look at those small green bars over there, the green triangles over there. You can see them on the 0, it's about 25. On the 1's also about 25. Coincidence. On the 2, it's like about 15. On 3 is maybe 20. 5, about 25. 8, maybe 40, and so on. And you know what that green triangle is? It's the average delivery time for stories of that category. Average. Look how close they are. Regular estimates, the big bars. No estimates, the triangles. Which one is more likely to give you actionable and valuable information about the duration of your project? So I would pick no estimates, no doubt. Then the next question is, which one is more predictable? So let's look at a project that used both. They actually used both. They counted stories and they did the story point estimation. So they started with 135. They were actually much better than most projects because they only had 3 numbers. Compared to the previous project, you see how this is much better because they are trying to narrow down the variability in size of the stories. But they had 135. They did a calculation and they said, okay, looking at the backlog we have, they estimated the whole backlog, by the way. Looking at the backlog that we have, we look at the release date, comparing story points delivered with what's left, and they did just a projection of those, and it was the 20th of October 2014. Then they did something magic. They said, let's take all the 5s and replace them with the 3s, and take all the 3s and replace them with the 2. How does that look like? Any guesses?
Same.
Very close. 6 days difference. Are you telling me story points don't give you any relevant information about the size of your project? Is that what you're telling me? Okay, let's take the next one. They took all the numbers, they put it to 1. So no 1, 2, 3, no 1, 3, 5, just 1. All stories, same size. They weren't the same size. Here's the key. They weren't the same size. They treated them as if they were the same size. So they didn't go and split the stories. They just took a story that was a 5 and said, this is now a 1. It's, you know, Excel magic. You can do it. Release date, 29th of September. So less than a month away for a, how long was that? 38 to 42 week project. That's a margin between the widest or the latest project and the earliest project projection of 8%. That's better than what StoryPoints did in the previous project example that I gave you. This is the guy that did that experiment, Bill Hanlon at Microsoft, and he told me in an email conversation that after I did this experiment, I stopped thinking estimation was relevant. Wouldn't you? By the way, you can do the same. What Bill did, you can go back, look at your backlog, just do the magic of Excel, change the numbers, project those, see what it looks like. You can do the same. It gets even better. This is what good estimation looks like when you ask the scholars. You know, the guys who spend many years doing PhDs on estimation. This is what they think is good estimation. When you're right, so when the estimates you provide are within 25% of the actual results, not 8%, not 10%, not 4%, 25%. Right? 1/4 wrong, 75% of the time. They don't say what happens to the other 25% of the time because probably the error margin is much higher on the rest 75%. This is what they call good estimations. And in this presentation, I've already shown you 3 different projects that have a much better track record than what the scholars of estimation consider to be good estimation. So what are we doing? We already have methods that are better than the, call it benchmark. Why are we still using? Here's an email I got from obviously a fan by now. They took 50 sprints. They looked back and they said, okay, what would happen if we would just count this as once? No story point, just count it. The deviation between the estimated and actual velocity would have been approximately 15% lower if we would have used no estimates. At no time was the story point based estimation better than no estimates. At no time. There was no single point in the project where story points would have given you more information about your schedule than just counting the number of stories. That's his project. You don't need to believe me. That's a testimonial. And I'm sure that if you look at your projects, you're not going to find a much different scenario than what this fellow here shared with me. Of course, there are certain things. I did talk about having a system of development, i.e. you have a way to transform an idea into something that goes into a production-like environment. So you're not just writing code into the version control, you're also writing it into actual users' machines, i.e. running tested software. Oh, and one more thing. Chaos report, 80% late or failed projects. If this is true, why are we still considering being on time as one of the key metrics of being successful? It would have been much more useful to have a metric of how many of those projects actually delivered value. Unfortunately, the metric might be worse. I don't know about you guys, but I know many stories of projects that were completely done, some of them even on time, but never got used. How about that for value delivery? One thing that we already know, this is by the way from Software Estimation by Steve McConnell, we already know that the larger the project, the worse the problem gets. So why do we do large projects? I don't know about you guys, I see no reason to do a 400 million euro project. This is what the state of Finland is doing right now with their healthcare system. And I'm pretty sure the guys who are getting the money have good lawyers. In the book that I'm writing, I talk about one case at the NHS where Accenture got out of a contract without paying any penalties. The estimated penalties that they should have paid would have been £2 billion. So that's like 20 gazillion euros, right? But they didn't pay any of that. They got out of the deal. They had good lawyers. That's what you pay with a lot of money, good lawyers. Here's one company. This line here, the 45-degree angle line, perfect accuracy. If you got a cross next to that line, you're golden. You delivered on time. Look at those two crosses up there. Those projects were supposed to last between 7 and something like 18 days. They lasted between 230 and 265 days. One of those projects in many companies would have been enough to bankrupt the company, especially if you're a small software house and you don't have money to pay for good lawyers. That's what we're doing. We're betting our future on a method that doesn't deliver. That's what estimates are. A method that doesn't deliver. It doesn't deliver value, because value has nothing to do with how long it takes. And it doesn't deliver accuracy. This data, the data I have here, was shared by Steve McConnell, the dean of estimates in the software community these days. He's the guy to go to. He's written many books about estimation. This is what we're doing. We're betting our house, we're betting our industry in something that doesn't work. But then I wanted to share this with you. This is a company where I actually work. The average delay of those projects was 62%. That was the average delay, not the worst delay. The worst delay was nearly 245%. Do you think this project was successful? Who thinks this project was successful? Hands up. I have no idea. I don't remember this project. How about this project? Who thinks this project was successful? Only one person, one brave soul. This project saved the company. 250% late. It saved the company. It created a new business model, got them new customers, got them a reliable, sustainable revenue stream. And the only reason why that company is alive is because of that project. And you know what a traditional organization would have done when this project was reporting to the steering committee? They would have fired their asses. And they would have had very good justification to do so. Some of it is in the bloody law. there are, if you are a company listed on the stock exchange, there are rules about projects. And you must report how much money you spend in projects. This company would have been destroyed in the stock market because of this project. And guess what? That project saved the company. How about that for the value of estimates? So, we come to the end of the rabbit hole. And this is the challenge for you now. You have to learn to bend the spoon. But as much as you may try, the only way you're going to succeed is if you bend. Because it's not the spoon that bends. There is no spoon. You've been living in an illusion. You have to start to learn to see the matrix. Thank you very much.
Take any questions?